Okay then, being that I was so clever and erased everything from class, I will do this over again, and also I may try to actually get on the screen what I meant to get on the screen. So again, remember we're going to be dealing with red-violet. We're starting from red-violet and then moving our way across all the way to the red on the other side. And actually what we're doing there is we're following the electromagnetic spectrum, which goes from ultraviolet to infrared in the end. So actually further than that, but basically that's kind of where we're arranging our visible spectrum, going from the red-violet, which is the ultraviolet, to the red, which moves towards infrared. The ultraviolet, depending on, and you'll see if you look this up, you can see different arrangements where a graph will move from red/infrared over towards ultraviolet, towards X-rays, towards gamma rays. But then there's also the reverse, so there's really not one way of taking a look at this. One thing that you can keep in mind is the fact that the red, those wavelengths that move towards the microwaves and then radio waves, those are the longer wavelengths. Whereas the ultraviolet going towards X-rays and then gamma rays, those are shorter wavelengths and they tend to cause harm, okay? So those are the wavelengths that cause radiation damage and so forth. So anyway, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be starting out with a benign version of the ultraviolet, and it's going to be red-violet. And for that, just as before, and I just used way too much yellow there. I don't even know if you can see this, or move this over here. Let's see. Yeah, I guess. Way too much yellow there. That's a total waste. But anyway, we're dealing with our initial typical primaries plus white, and then we're also going to want to have a little bit of black, because once you get to the darkest values, even on these color value scales, you'll find that by mixing the complement, you're not going to be able to get dark enough. So that's how we shade a color actually, is we're using the color's complement and mix that into the color, and that should give us shades. So complementary colors are the colors that are directly opposite of one another on the color wheel. So for red-violet, that is yellow-green. Now yellow-green has an inherently pretty light value, and that's going to be one of the tricky things here because it's not going to get us very far as creating a really deep shade is concerned. If you look at the overall chart, you'll see that red-violet has a pretty dark inherent value for the fully saturated hue, and there's really only about 3 shades that go any darker, so lots and lots of tints going on there. And I have issues with my magenta, which you can kind of see right here maybe as I'm starting to paint. It's extremely kind of goopy, and because it's so goopy I have to add a bunch of water to get it to mix appropriately, but then it's starting to go really transparent on me, so it's a bit of an issue that I'm going to be combating here to a degree. And I actually might try to fix that. See, I'm adding a little bit of my blue, and that's ultra intense, too intense when you recall the red-violet on your color wheel. So I'm going to have to tone that down just a little bit by adding a tiny bit of yellow, because remember, essentially we want to be mixing our colors with not our printer's primaries but our primary primaries, and we can't get those primary primaries by just using the cyan, magenta, and yellow. Those are the ultra pure pigments. So if you take a look at this here, if I paint this down, I have that same issue that I had before in class, which is my paint is incredibly transparent, and it truly has everything to do with the terrible quality of this particular tube of paint. And in fact, I tried out different tubes, which I ordered all at the same time, and apparently the entire lot is kind of past its expiration date. You can see here how slimy that is. It's really awful. So I'm going to add a bit more yellow to this, slight bit more blue. And I'm going to see what happens if I potentially just get a tiny bit of white in there, tiny, tiny, to try to increase my opacity, just slightly. That's sometimes your saving grace would be to add just a tiny bit of white, and that might be doing the trick here for me. Hard to say. However, what I'm seeing here is that this red violet might be a bit on the warm side. So, a bit more. But see, you can see it's like minute amounts of white that I'm mixing in here because I really don't want to completely desaturate this. Why, you might ask yourself, is it such a big deal for me to get my perfect red violet here? Well, that's because I'm going to be mixing essentially from my pure hue. Maybe this will do the trick. I'm going to be mixing from that hue towards my shades and then also towards my tints. So I have to be able to have a good baseline hue that I'm happy with. Otherwise, I'm going to be fighting the tints and shades just as much as I'm fighting my base hue here, my pure hue. See how that's, again, really, really cool? I think what I want to be at is right here, and I don't know, see, and that's like, again, the issue where I'm hoping you can see this, what I'm doing here. So anyway, it's hard for me to tell. So I'm going to go now and I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to actually go towards my shades to begin with. It's up to you whether you want to go towards tints or shades. I would not recommend going a little bit towards the shades for a couple of values and then trying to go towards the tints. It's probably not the best of ideas. So what I'm doing here, and that was my dogs just now, by the way, in case you were wondering about that. Very useful contribution there on their end. So you can see here that I'm doing a lot of yellow and blue here as far as adding color to my red violet is concerned. And I have to be really careful at this point that I don't get too blue in that shade. So again, I'm going to see, yeah, you can still see this. Actually, I'm going to move my palette on top of here a bit. You can see here probably that this has a potential of getting potentially too bluish. So I'm going to combat that a bit by adding a slight more amount of yellow. See that? And this is looking like a better shade, I think. So, too much water. See that? Too much water. One thing that you're going to find is that you're probably going to develop a great deal of patience doing this, because it's all about being okay with not getting it right. Okay, so here's another one. A little bit more yellow. So you can see this is not an ultra speedy approach, and I'm painting a whole bunch of different swatches, and you're much better off painting additional swatches next to one another than trying to get that one swatch just perfectly right, because I guarantee you, you're not going to be able to get it perfectly right, for one, and you're going to be more effective if you do many swatches more quickly. So if you just saw that, I now added a tiny bit of black into my red violet here. Notice, by the way, also that I'm keeping my shades on one side here of the palette, and then I'm going to do my tints over on the other side so that I can avoid intermixing and muddying up my tints, because I definitely don't want to have black in my tints. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to create these sort of desaturated tones, and that's not at all what I'm after. So not at this point anyway. Okay, I'm going to try to somehow speed this up somewhat. But I'm sure you can see that there's a gradation that's starting to happen here pretty clearly. And there are many more steps that I'm actually gonna need. But again, that's the whole thing about give yourself more options rather than too few. It's much better to have more options than too few. So now I'm gonna assume that I'm pretty set here as far as my shades are concerned. And I'm going to move towards the tints. Now, notice how very carefully I'm washing out my brush, which I didn't do before. So now I have a ton of tints that I need to produce here. And I'm going to go through a bunch of white. So again, remember, this is my sort of my batch here of red violet, and you can see now that that actually was a bit too much white, so I need more of my magenta, my primary red here. And it's starting to look pretty pink, isn't it? That's a really, really kind of harsh and cold pink, and that's something that's going to be the trick, not just with the red violet, but also when we're starting to tint the red. It's very, very difficult to keep the temperature true to the actual hue. So this right here is too cool. So in order to warm this up a bit, got to add some yellow. And you can see now just that I did this, and can we see it? Yes, we can. You can see that this is now falling into the same family as what I've had so far. So there we go, beautiful. That was an intense step. Again, a little bit of, ooh, too much yellow. And you can see here, if you look at these swatches, if we can look at them, you can see here that as I'm adding the white, my paint is becoming more and more opaque. And that's because my white is very opaque, duh. And it's also got the correct consistency. Actually, all my white, my cyan, and my yellow, none of them are goopy and horrible like my primary red / my magenta. So I really got the short end of the stick there. And I think we had this conversation that some of you have the same issues with your primary red as well. So, and every time that you add white, you will find that you meet that same problem again, which is that, ooh, too much yellow, that your hue will get cooler and cooler and cooler. So there we go. This is better. Beautiful colors, by the way, here. It's like sunrise colors, isn't it? But if you look at that right there, this might just be a little bit too cool. So I need more white. Go back to my, this is the beauty of this, see? I still have my base red, violet, magenta, pink, my base hue here, so I can return to that and nothing is lost. And then I can just bring a little bit more yellow into this if I'm finding that it's just again getting slightly too cool. You may also notice that actually you don't need a whole lot of a darker pigment at all to move away from white. So I now have to be kind of careful because I already have the paint in my brush that has some of that red violet, right, that it's getting in there. Oh, see? And now you can see how incredibly warm this one is, for example, and how very cool in comparison that one there is. Oops. So a few of these might just be too warm, where this would actually be a tinted red. And you'll see that once you're doing, and that's actually going to be easier for you if you have the red and the red violet on two different ends, because those two are really, really difficult to separate. You'll find the same thing too when you're doing your red orange versus the red. The hot colors are tricky because that heat is so intense. I even have like my dual bucket here, by the way. You can't see that at all. Maybe let me show you this. See, I have a dual bucket. So I have my tints over here and my shades over there as I'm rinsing out my brush. It's quite convenient. You don't have to have a dual bucket, obviously, but you could use two different ones if you're really OCD like me. You can't skimp on the paint. I think I said that before. So if we're taking a look at my palette right now, there's a lot of paint on here. Lots and lots and lots of paint. And in order to make my mixing successful, there's really hardly any way around that. You cannot do things trying to save paint. That doesn't work. Okay, let's pretend like I have enough here. And this is where we have the musical interlude where I'm trying to, here's the palette again, by the way. And I have my own scissors. Look at that. What a concept. Okay, so I'm doing exactly really the same thing as I did in class. I don't know if I mentioned it, but it was rather stupid because that whole thing that I was gonna throw up for you guys, I deleted. So that wasn't so clever. Oh, here's an interesting thing. See that right there? I dripped some water on here. That's bad. Thankfully, I still have enough to punch a square from, but you really have to be careful with not dripping water because it will ruin your swatch. So I'm gonna leave that one sitting there, sort of hoping that I can work with it without messing everything up. So this one very, very yellow. You will be amazed shortly what's gonna happen here with this. Did I mention scissors are a convenient thing? I really should have put that on our list. If you have any scissors, or you can get your hands on some, I really recommend it. It makes life so much easier. The other thing that's helpful is if you do get one of those heat gun things. If you're like the ultra super speedy worker and you want to make sure that you can be completely efficient in your efforts. Okay, I'm going to get another piece of white paper here so that we can see a bit better what's happening. This is where music, the break time music. Okay, maybe. So, I wanted this because we're not going to be able to see too well on the brown background what's really going on here. So, as before, I'm going to punch out all of these squares, and happily already have the thing that I made. So, it could be like the cooking show, and I could say, yes, so here it is. This is how it's going to look. This is also still where the musical interlude happens. You will find that as you punch these out, while they seem to look really different on your paper, probably a lot of them are pretty much the same. You just go, what? That can't be. But sadly, that happens all the time, that there's really, they look so different, and then you put them next to each other. It's that question of simultaneous contrast. Like if you're looking at all of these right there, they all look pretty much the same as far as I can tell right now. So that's a little cause for concern. But maybe not. See, that's what I mean by it's a really good idea to paint more than you actually think you need, because hopefully then you end up with the 10 steps that you need, right? Also, hopefully you have been able to produce an appropriate grayscale. I know some of you had still some, on your bigger grayscale, there were still some leanings towards either overwhelmingly dark values, or very few of you had issues with overwhelmingly light values. So if you don't have that yet, you should probably work on that before anything else, because you're going to need to align every single one of these color value scales to correct value scale. And if you don't have that, then obviously you can't do that. So, duh, right? Okay. They all look the same. See? They all look the same. So we think. Maybe not. Also, do make sure that your swatches are big enough, because nothing is as frustrating as finally getting the right hue and the right value, and then like this one is tricky right here. This one's looking pretty good, and I could barely get my square out of there. So very frustrating. See that right here? That was a close call, a very close call. Ah, and they're all the same, all the same. Okay, getting there. Skip that one. Okay, whoa. So let's see what we have here. Clearly these are here my lightest ones, right? I think I'd go with this one probably. Can we see this? Yes. Awfully close, huh? See, and then in this simultaneous contrast, remember, it's all about establishing the right relationships between the different hues. So while my 120 gray color scale might look really fantastic, and all my different hues are or values are perfectly relating to one another, they might not end up looking right when put in relationship to one another. So it's all about the sort of logic between what is this value compared to this value like if it's set against that value, if that makes any sense. So see, and as soon as I start adding the darker values, all this down here changes completely to where I want to say, well, you know, I think I'd rather have this one here perhaps. And then maybe this one, perhaps. See, and that was something totally different just a few seconds ago. So let's see where we can go from here. That's fairly similar, so maybe I can take this one out. And those are the same, right? Pretty much. So how many steps? 3, 6, 8. So I need 2 more. Okay. And probably I want one that's really darkish. And then the darkest one towards the end, and this one's streaky. What do we think? Now let's see how it compares to the other one. I think that's pretty good. Let's see how that lines up. There we go. And that's what we're going for, right? We're going for the perfect alignment of the values. But we can only do that if we have the grayscale. You can't do it without the grayscale. And don't be distracted by this. So that's just the tape. I'm going to tear that off. So let me see, I'll put this other stuff on the tape as well. And all of this I'm going to speed up, of course, because this is rather boring. And it just keeps going. Okay, so here we have it. First one, red violet. Hallelujah. Only 11 more to go.